This is the ZowieTek tiny little 4K box style video camera, and you may have come across it on Amazon.com like I did and wondered if it was any good. And honestly, I'm probably not keeping it, and I'll just let the video from this camera speak for itself as one of the main reasons why. And most, if not all of the video in this video will be from the ZowieTek camera, but I had to record it in OBS, and I had to do that with this version by taking the NDI feed into OBS to record it there. But I'm also routing the HDMI output of the ZowieTek camera over to an Atomos Ninja, and I'm recording it externally there. Or I might be using a Blackmagic A10 Mini because this camera does not have any internal recording. There's no SD card slot, no micro SD card slot. It does have a USB-C port, but that seems to be just for power. And I picked up this camera because I thought it was going to be just about everything I wanted in a tiny little camera that could do a lot of things and be a camera for testing purposes or a secondary or backup camera or maybe even a webcam, but it actually doesn't even have standard webcam protocol, which I'll get to. But this camera's not for me, and the main reason I'm doing a video on it is because I just don't think it's a good camera at all in terms of image quality. And you kind of have to be a little bit technical to be able to access most of the functions and get the signal routed to your computer if you do want to try to use it that way, maybe as a web camera. And hey, I didn't want you to waste your money if it's not for you. But let's cover the features real quick because it does have a lot of cool features packed into a very tiny camera, and that's one of the things I liked about it. It's small size because that meant I could squeeze it into tight locations if I needed to. I thought it would be something that I could just throw in my bag and take with me for use in my work in live event production. And one of the main reasons I was looking at it is because I wanted a small camera with an SDI output. And this camera has not only an SDI output, but it also has an HDMI output, and both the SDI and HDMI video outputs work at the same time. It has an Ethernet port for connection to your network. It can be powered on that Ethernet port via PoE or power over Ethernet with a PoE switch or PoE injector. It has an audio input as well via a 3.5mm jack on the back, but you need to send a strong line level signal into that jack. It's not meant as a mic preamp for small 3.5mm microphones like the Rode Video Micro. You can't just plug in small mics like that and get a good signal. You have to send a stronger line level signal into it. And right now you're actually hearing me on this SE Electronics SE7 microphone recorded on my Zoom F3 recorder, and I synced up the video and audio later in the video edit. But now you're hearing me on the Rode Video Mic NTG, and I'm sending the Rode Video Mic NTG's audio signal into the Zowie Cam because the Rode Video Mic NTG specifically has its own power, so it can send a stronger level out of the microphone directly and over to the camera. So that's what you're hearing right now, and the audio does get embedded into the NDI feed and to the HDMI and SDI signal so that you can record the audio and video together, again, on an external device. But this camera can do up to 4K resolution at 30 frames per second, and it has many other 4K and 1080p resolutions and frame rates to choose from. This particular model is just a manual focus lens, which was fine for what I needed, and you can see here you just turn the lens and focus it up where you need to. Although that can be tricky if you want the camera mounted in a place that's just out of arm's reach like I wanted mine over to the far right side of my desk, or even where it is now filming this video. It's a little tough to reach and focus it while trying to keep my face in the right spot, even with my long arms. Also, the version I got is a fixed focal length, so you're going to get a fixed field of view. There's no optical zoom on the lens, and the field of view is roughly equivalent to about a 22mm lens or focal length on a full frame camera like my Sony a7 IV. But you can go into the menu or web interface and digitally zoom the camera there if you need to. And this roughly 22mm equivalent is mostly okay for my liking most of the time based on where I was going to put the camera when I got it, but it would do the trick here in my home office if I needed it to. And you have the option to buy a version that can do NDI-HX3 right out of the box. You can have a network video feed to go again into OBS or vMix or send it anywhere on your network that you needed to. And I think the NDI version is only about $10 more, and for me it was worth $10 just to get a version that already had the NDI-HX license installed. It has 3 1/4-20 mounting points, one on the top, one on the bottom, and one on the right side depending on which way you're looking at the camera. It has a button on the back to access the camera's menu and make basically any change to the camera you need to, like exposure, frame rate, etc. And therefore you can make changes to pretty much anything on the camera without having to hook it up to a computer. But I don't know if they just didn't try to use the button themselves when they started producing this, because you press the button to bring up the menu, but you're supposed to be able to use the button as a joystick to go up, down, left, or right to access different functions in the menu. But since the button is almost flush with the back of the camera, pressing it up or down, left or right is almost impossible. You have to kind of get your fingernail in there to maneuver the button. And if you bite your fingernails like mine, they're a bit short and you have to find, a small screwdriver or something. Otherwise, you're just pretty much only able to press it in. And I have similar small cameras like this one from Makosi, which also has a button on the back that acts as a press to access the menu and then joystick button to maneuver around that menu. But with the Makosi, you can see that it protrudes from the camera so you can actually use all the functions of the button, whereas the button on the ZowieTek just isn't a good joystick button, although it does work that way if you can maneuver the button up, down, and left and right. That being said, at least with the NDI-HX version, I can't speak to the other versions, but since I have a network port on this version, you can connect it to the network, and then I can actually log into the camera's web page using Chrome or Safari or your web browser of choice, and you can just make all the changes there on the web GUI. You can set your exposure, change your color, change your frame rate, change your NDI codec bitrate, and all that good stuff. There is an app called ZowieX, which you can install on, in this case, my MacBook Pro. And I installed it at first, but it was a bit slow and unresponsive at times, so I've just used a web browser to make all the changes to the camera that I needed. As far as recording, it says it can record to a network attached storage device. I'm not sure, I didn't want to try that, and plugging in an SSD, like a solid state drive, to the USB port on the camera did not work. The camera status on the web GUI just said no memory found. And of course, trying to plug in a USB external drive to the USB port on the camera means the camera doesn't get power from the USB port. So you would have to, and I did power the camera via POV when I tried this, but still the web page said no memory found. I also didn't expect it to record on camera when I bought it, so it hasn't been a big deal for me. I'm just recording again in OBS or externally. However, you'd hope that that USB-C port would allow you to connect the camera directly to your computer with a USB-C cable and use this as a webcam, but you'd be disappointed because apparently there's no UVC protocol in the camera, which seems like the easiest thing to have included considering all of the other features this thing has. And I did try plugging it into my MacBook Pro and opening up Zoom and OBS to see if it would show up, and although I did then see a new UVC camera listed here in the devices when choosing it, it just kind of hangs and then gives you a black screen after a bit. So if there is any UVC protocol, it's definitely not user friendly. So I found it very odd that it listed a UVC camera, but you're unable to use it, making it a bit confusing. So without UVC or USB video class functionality built in, you're either going to have to be really good at routing this thing via NDI, or you're going to have to feed the HDMI or SDI outputs over to a capture card and use that if you do want to use this camera in meeting platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meets, etc. And apparently you can stream directly to YouTube, Twitch, and I think some other streaming platforms directly from the camera, and you can set that up in the web GUI if you need to, but I'm not going to go into that, nor do I live stream myself to those platforms really, so it's not of much use for me. Now, if all of these features have impressed you, then I will simply rely on the image quality to speak for itself, because the image can look pretty good. The problem is, if you've seen most often or a lot of the time, there's this kind of horizontal video noise going on, and I'm not sure during this recording of this video if it's happened much. I think I'm seeing it quite a bit down here on my monitor, and I do have some examples of this that I'll show you in a bit, but this happens a lot and it's kind of unpredictable. And this happens on the NDI output as well as the HDMI and SDI outputs. All three images always look the same when this horizontal noise banding thing happens. So it didn't seem to be limited to maybe the NDI output, which I thought could be an issue. It happens on all three outputs. And it's a bit random, and there doesn't seem to be anything in the menu or web GUI that fixes it. And here's some of that footage I recorded earlier that definitely shows this, so I'll just let you watch that. All right, so here is an example of what I'm talking about. You can see all these kind of weird colored lines going across the top of the image. Sometimes it happens at the bottom, sometimes it happens at the top. Sometimes I don't see it that much at all, but I've seen it more often than not. And this happens both with the NDI feed, which I'm recording in OBS, and that's the recording you're looking at right now. This is NDI into OBS recording. You can see all these weird colored lines. And it happens with the SDI output of the camera too. I'm sending the SDI output over to this ATEM SDI Pro ISO, and now you're seeing that. So other than the little bit of color difference, you can see that the weird colored scan lines are happening on both outputs. And this happens on the HDMI output as well, and that's what you're watching right now. I'm recording the HDMI output on my Atomos Ninja here. However, to note, the HDMI output from the ZowieCam just would not be recognized by the Ninja directly. I actually had to run the HDMI output of the ZowieCam through another monitor and then over to the Atomos Ninja. And I think that's more of an Atomos problem, but I didn't have a problem with the signal from the ZowieCam going to any other of my monitors. So it is something to note if you do want to record the HDMI output using Atomos products. But the point here is that I've never really seen this type of horizontal noise banding in any of the other webcams that I've tried. And to me, this is more than just sensor noise that you would get from a small sensor camera, and the ZowieCam obviously is a small sensor camera. It's just something I haven't ever really seen before, and because it's happening on the NDI output, the HDMI output, and the SDI output, I just don't know how people would use this camera in any sort of real production. So for me, and I would think for you, that just doesn't work. If you can't buy a camera and have the image look good, what's the point? Also, if it matters, the camera does have a small fan to keep it cool, but here in my home office, I can actually hear the fan when the camera is only about 3 feet away from me. And being an audio nerd, I don't like hearing that little whine from a fan, so be aware of that. So I think that's it for me on this. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about a camera that I'm probably not going to keep. I really wanted this thing to work out because I wanted a small camera that could do more than my SDI only Makosi little security cameras that I use for SDI testing. And I figured this ZowieCam had not only SDI, but also had HDMI, networking capabilities, NDI-HX codecs, but maybe this was just a warning to not get this camera. I mean, if you wanted to put it up as a security camera around your house, it would be okay for that if you're good at networking and viewing that via NDI. It's fine for testing workflows or just to have a small camera with an SDI output, but you can't use it as a webcam via USB directly. The image quality, although at times okay, that horizontal banding is just a deal breaker for any camera. So with that, I'll let you decide. And hey, I'll even leave an affiliate link below to Amazon if you do want to buy this thing. But as for me, I think I'll be sending it back. All right, later. All right, before I go, I wanted to give this camera one more chance. The video you've just watched is my basic opinion of this camera. I don't really think I'm going to be keeping it, but again, wanted to give it one more chance. So the rest of this video is going to be me showing you different frame rates and going through kind of some of the web GUI to see how I can and have been able to clean this image up a bit. And maybe that will help determine if you are able to get it to look as decent as I think it looks now. But anyway, let's just continue this with a little bit more of an impromptu and completely unscripted goings through of all of some of the settings and frame rates and see how that looks. And the image can look pretty great like it does right now. I don't see any of this horizontal flickering going on right now. I set the camera to 1080p 60 and I went in and set the exposure mode to auto and then back to manual and readjusted the exposure. So this is manual exposure. And now I'm looking over here at OBS and it looks nice and clean right now, but I have experienced these horizontal noise banding lines coming back at some point in an undetermined amount of time. So I'm just not really sure, and I really can't trust that the camera is going to stay looking this good when it didn't look this good for the rest of the video. And I thought maybe it just looks better at 1080p 60 frames per second, but a few minutes ago I did experience that horizontal noise banding again. So I'm just not sure at this point. And now I've actually switched the camera to 4K 24, which is how I also recorded most of the video in OBS via NDI. However, that looked so bad that most of the video, you're actually watching the recording I did on the Atomos Ninja here because it just looked a lot better. The NDI feed seems to look a lot worse at 4K than it does at 1080p. However, my home network, I wouldn't say is exactly set up to be fully NDI compatible. It's just, you know, my home router and a couple of switches here, although they are all gigabit switches. So I don't think there's any sort of throughput or bandwidth capacity within my home network. All right, here is 1080p 24 frames per second, and this is recorded in OBS at 100 megabits per second. So I set the recording rate of OBS to be pretty high. And looking over here, I'm seeing much more noise and horizontal banding. So maybe this is just an issue with frame rates other than 1080p 60. Maybe because this camera is really meant as an NDI camera that it's just better at 60 frames per second than things that I want to film at like 23.98 or 24 frames per second because I like that frame rate and how it looks. But I never use 23.98, 24, or 25 frames per second when I'm live streaming for work. I'm always at either 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second when I'm doing this for work. So there's that. Now let's switch back to 1080p 60 and see if it cleans up the signal. Hang on. All right, we are back at 1080p 60 on the camera itself and 1080p 60 in OBS. I changed the frame rate in OBS to record this portion. And I did have to go into the web GUI and set the exposure to auto and then set it back to manual and then readjust the gain, and now it looks pretty good. So I guess with some work, and assuming you're only going to be using this for live streaming and running it either 1080p 30, 1080p 60, or 4K 30, it looks a lot better. But if you don't know that you have to go into the exposure settings and set it to auto and then back to manual just to try to clean it up, that just doesn't seem like something that people are going to know to do, or that you would have to do on a camera. You set the frame rate and you would think it would look just fine, but having to toggle settings to get it to clean up is not great. It is an inexpensive camera. It is a small sensor camera. So I guess maybe you get what you pay for, but this is like a $230, $250 camera. So it's nothing to shake a stick at. I don't know why you'd shake sticks at things anyway, but anyway. All right, let me show you what I mean. Now I've set the camera back to 1080p 30 frames per second, and I've set OBS to 1080p 30 as well. And I'm seeing this horizontal banding noise thing going on. But if we switch over to you looking at my screen here, if I go to camera and then image, and I go over here, this is what I'm talking about, where I have to toggle the settings to maybe clean this up. Let's set it to auto, and then we'll set it back to manual. And then we can adjust some settings. Let me look over here at my NDI video monitor. I need to make this a little bigger so I can see what's going on. So unfortunately, didn't clean up this as much on the 1080p 30. Let's go AE lock, turn that back off, set it to auto, set it to manual. And let's take the gain down because I'm a little overexposed. So it's not looking as good in 1080p 30 at the moment. Still see the banding. Let me just reset to 1080p 60. One moment, please. There we go. We'll drop this to 1080p. Where is it? 1080p 60. Save that. Give it a second. All right, there. It took it a second to come back up, and it still doesn't look great. Let's go over to image again. Let's go and just toggle these settings on and off. Set it back to manual. Even though I'm at 1080p 60, I'm going to keep my shutter at 1/60th of a second. And there, if I take the gain down, seems to clean up. Let me switch this back to the full screen view of me. So to me, it's hard to see because I'm looking over there. I don't have a monitor in front of me because it would block the view of the camera to me. That looks better. I think it looks a lot better. So, you know, you have to play with it a lot to get it to look good. But I guess if you do a little work, you can make it look decent. But I probably wouldn't put it on any prime time or really important live streams. I might use it as a spy camera to look at things, you know, backstage in my live events, or a lot of times I'll put them down as like a stage camera in front of the stage to just see what's going on the stage in case I'm a little too far away. Or again, here in my home office where I might use this as a webcam if I don't end up returning it like I think I have said many times in this video. So I don't know, maybe I'll keep it.